Here we go again.
No, not again.
You've been fooled.
How long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the
Again until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews with connections in mind. Alien Covenant is now the sixth film in the Alien franchise. It acts as a sequel to 2012's Prometheus, and like Prometheus, it's also directed by Ridley Scott, the original director of the Alien movie. And this takes place before the first Alien, but 10 years after the events of Prometheus, and follows the crew of the Covenant, a colony ship on its way to a new world, when it intercepts a rogue transmission and decides to investigate it by finding a new planet, which it seems to be a paradise, undiscovered and untouched. But as with all Alien films, when that sort of thing happens, nothing good comes of it, and things go downhill really fast for any and all humans involved. So this video review will contain certain spoilers of Alien Covenant, as well as certain plot-related spoilers of other films and TV series as well. There will be a full list in the description below. And if you have not seen Alien Covenant yet, or any of the films or TV series listed below and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and come back later. But with these things in mind though, let's begin. So as I said, Alien Covenant follows the crew of the colony ship Covenant, who, after experiencing a severe neutrino burst, damages the ship and kills its captain. And the new captain who steps up is somewhat inexperienced, and he makes some rash decisions when a rogue transmission is intercepted, and he goes to investigate an unknown planet, which seems to be a paradise. But it turns out that this is the planet where where Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, and the Michael Fassbender's android character David ended up after the events of 2012's Prometheus. And of course they brought the Xenomorph plague with them, and inevitably the remaining crew of the Covenant starts to get killed off by proto-Xenomorphs, and we also learn that the Xenomorph species is beginning to evolve more towards the point of the form that we end up seeing in the original Alien film, and the form that we've all come to know throughout the last 40 years of Alien lore. Now, there's some certain elements of this film that they're very obviously from previous films that have come before it, so let's start with the obvious ones and go from there. First, while this isn't necessarily You've Seen It Before, because it's inevitable that a movie based in a long franchise would end up doing callbacks to the previous films in that franchise, it's still fun to point out that there are certain elements of Alien Covenant that you've seen before from previous installments in the Alien franchise, some that you might not necessarily expect. For example, there's one point in particular near the end of the film when a full-fledged Xenomorph is loose on the Covenant itself, and there's a point where the remaining crew of the Covenant is trying to lure it somewhere, and we end up seeing the point of view of the Xenomorph in certain instances as it goes towards this ship. Now, this is not the first time we've seen the point of view of the Xenomorph. First time being the third film of the franchise, Alien 3, and though that one was not necessarily the best time to do it, to do the first person of the Xenomorph in that movie, it wasn't the best use of it. Here in Alien Covenant, it serves as just kind of a fun callback to the previous film. Also, near the end of this film, there's a cool callback to the bird drinkers. I don't know what else you would call them. The little plastic bird sipper things on the bridge of the Covenant at the end, which is a callback to the decoration on the dining room table of the Nostromo in the first Alien movie. And overall, I would say one of the big complaints of Prometheus was that it didn't have enough connections to the original Alien franchise in order to do it. I submit that it also had suffered from a bit of Star Wars prequelitis in that It had a lot of new technology that did not that doesn't necessarily existed in the original format of the series, especially with the design of the ship Prometheus. But when the design of the new ship Covenant, it is very obvious that there are many similar design cues that harken back to the original design of the Nostromo, at least the detachable lander section of the Nostromo, within, especially in the cockpit sections between the Nostromo and the Covenant. Next, and this is where it's going to get very spoiler heavy here, but if you go in to see this film, you'll see the obvious twist coming a mile away. It comes in the form of when near the end of the second act, where we're starting to get the climax, about halfway through actually, we learn that the crew of the Covenant discovers the ship that Dr. Elizabeth Shaw and David used to escape from the planet in Prometheus, but once the crew of the Covenant is under attack, they are saved by a rebuilt David. The interesting thing is, the crew of the Covenant also has a synthetic, also played by Michael Fassbender, named Walter, and he's designed a little differently than David, being somehow less human and more analytical in mind, whereas David was more artistic and creative, but also flawed in all the ways that humans are flawed, mainly emotionally. And this creates some interesting dynamics throughout the film, but of course there is a sequence in which the two end up fighting each other because some dirty laundry is aired by the fact that David, in his intervening 10 years after the events of Prometheus, has decided to breed and evolve the Xenomorphs. And understandably, Walter and David get into a fight, and there comes a point where the action cuts away from these two androids fighting at right at the same point, so it hides the fact that for the rest of the film, up until the very end, that there was a bit of a switcheroo made, and David ends up masquerading as Walter, and that isn't revealed until it's too late for the survivors of the Covenant. Now, this is something very similar to sci-fi in general, and especially anything that involves twins in any film. But sticking with the sci-fi genre, I would point to a couple instances. A more lighthearted example would be Third Rock from the Sun, in fact, where between the season 1 finale and the season 2 two-part opener, we have Dick, played by John Lithgow, ends up getting replaced by another alien who ends up being an evil duplicate. Essentially, he takes the same form as the character Dick, so it's also played by John Lithgow. And in season 2, the two end up fighting, and although it's a comedy show, there is an instance where the evil Dick pretends to be the good Dick, but when everyone else leaves the room, it's revealed to the audience that it's actually the evil Dick pretending. But the more famous example, I would say, of this form of storytelling with the twins, and I would say this almost directly referenced in Alien Covenant, would be Star Trek: The Next Generation, with the characters of Data and Lore, both played by Brent Spiner. And this is most explored in the episode, I believe it was Datalore, in which the character of Lore is first discovered, in which Data is where Data is a very analytical and not very human android, but he has the ability to learn human things. Lore was designed to be be very human, but he was also very arrogant and cruel, and they end up fighting each other. And at a certain point, Data is deactivated, and Lore takes Data's uniform and pretends to be Data for much of the episode until the end, where it's revealed that he was a doppelganger the whole time. But it's also an interesting comparison between Data and Lore and Walter and David from Alien Covenant, where in Alien Covenant it's learned that through a flashback sequence that David Upon reaching the planet, which ends up being the engineer's planet, the same species of aliens from Prometheus, he ends up purposefully releasing the alien, the Xenomorph virus on this population of engineers and ends up wiping them out. And he also ends up betraying the surviving crew of the Covenant to the Xenomorphs one by one, or several at a time, in fact, where the parallel comes in is also in the episode Datalore, where the character of Lore is said to have betrayed the colonists on Omicron Theta to the crystalline entity, which ends up killing the entire colony, and he ends up planning to do the same to the crew of the Enterprise when he's eventually stopped. So there's a long-winded way of saying the characters of Walter and David, while by far the best part of this film, of Alien Covenant, they were clearly inspired in more than a few ways by the characters of Data and Lore from Star Trek The Next Generation. Next, there's also in a further but different parallel, with going back to the character of David, played by Michael Fassbender. In the film, it's revealed that David has been breeding the Xenomorphs in order to what he calls a perfect being, and he does this by sacrificing humans and what other animal form that he can find in order to create the Xenomorph into the perfect form. Now, this is also very similar, if anyone's ever seen the Stargate Atlantis episodes featuring the character of Michael, played by Connor Trenier, in which Michael is a wraith who is captured by the Atlantis expedition, turned into a human for a brief time, but then he switches back between wraith and human a couple times, where he settles somewhere in the middle, and in the seasons afterwards, it's revealed that Michael has been trying to create a perfect being, or soldier, in order to create an army, in order to combat the Wraith and the humans, and replace them as the dominant form in the galaxy. And he does this a couple times by sacrificing humans of the galaxy in order to create these life forms. So there's another interesting comparison between that. It feels weird that there's always the comparisons between David and all these other sci-fi franchises, but in reality, there's a lot of things that are very similar in the characters of David, but there's also many things in comparison, comparable film techniques as well, with between Alien Covenant and other horror films in the past. Mainly through filming techniques to build suspense and create good jump scares between camera angles and score. There are lots of different things that have been done over the past, and Ridley Scott is really good at this, and he's proved that in the first Alien film, and he proves it again here, but by this point you've definitely seen it before, and there'd be too many examples to go into in a short movie review for that. So there you have it. Those are the main connections between Alien Covenant and films that I've seen before. Obviously, I connect with the more sci-fi genre of the characters of David and Walter and their comparisons with other films, especially Star Trek, since I consider myself a pretty big Trekkie. But all that being said, would I say you should go see this film? Well, I would divide this recommendation into two categories. One, if you're a hardcore Alien fan, and one, if you're just a casual moviegoer who likes the horror genre. If you're the latter, who's not a huge fan of the Alien franchise, but can appreciate a good scare, I would say you would go see this, mainly because there's definitely nothing you've seen before, but the reason you've seen it so many times over the years is that it's more or less effective, and the gore factor on this, there were several instances where it's like, oh, okay, cool. So, which is terrible to say when people are getting killed in various ways, but it's very jarring, and if you're going for that sort of thing, if you're a fan of the horror genre, then you'll find enough to enjoy in this. It's a simple enough plot to follow. It doesn't rely on a whole lot of backstory in order to Prometheus and Alien in order to get the main story across, but obviously if you know these things, then you add that it adds more enjoyment to those elements, which brings to my next recommendation for if you're a true Alien fan, would you go see this film? I would say if you were disappointed by Prometheus for not having enough Alien Xenomorph action, then they definitely addressed that here. But if you were disappointed by Alien or disappointed by Prometheus because it kind of didn't, it was too brainy in a sense that it was kind of very thought provoking, but not a whole lot of interesting characters or good, really interesting plot points, and to get kind of muddled. Well, I would say that they kind of fix that too, but honestly, there are a lot of points where it just kind of goes all the place. And I've seen a couple other reviews, and I would have to agree with them that after digesting this film, it is kind of disconcerting when you do have kind of two separate movies going on here. One, the straight up scary and gore fest with aliens trying to kill people, but also the kind of brainy aspects of creation versus humanity, and is humanity worth surviving, and what about humanity is worth keeping alive? These questions are very well explored by the dynamic between Michael Fassbender and the dual role of Walter and David, and that's by far the best part of this film. Michael Fassbender definitely carried this movie, but overall, I would say you should see this film. It is a good part. It is now a part of the Alien franchise, even though there are better films than the Alien franchise. But I would say it's definitely not the worst Alien film. That still, in my opinion, still belongs to Alien Resurrection. But hey, they'd probably still have it. That movie still has its fans too. So who am I to say? So there you have it. There's my review of Alien Covenant. I appreciate whatever audience I get. If you're watching this, thank you for watching and making it through the end. My next video review, look for my review of Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales, which is coming out May 26th. And yeah, until next time, there's nothing new under the sun, and yes, you have seen it before. So thank you for watching.